Hey there. Take your time. I'm Nicholas DiMancio. I'm head of architecture here at MIT, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight. I'm going to start off this evening before introducing Bob and Rebecca, who have really masterminded this event, and I'm very grateful to them for them, with our land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous people as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationships that exist between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. Now, if you'll indulge me for a second, land acknowledgements are interesting things. When I came to the MIT in spring of 2020, I suggested it turns out we were like only 6 or 8 weeks away from MIT adopting its own official land acknowledgement, but I suggested strongly that we included one in the openings of our lectures. I don't have much of an accent, but I'm originally Australian, so go Socceroos. But I've, as part of, with that part of my identity, I've understood how land acknowledgements, or as they're called in Australia, acknowledgements of country, have formed a very important, if small, catalyst in the larger reckoning of that society with its structural racism and history of oppression of its indigenous people up to the very, very recent times. Yet it's just words, right? And these official words from MIT are just that, official words from MIT. They're now being revised, and we're looking for them. And so what I always like to say, not at much length with as much length as I have tonight, is these words are meaningless unless we turn them into action in how we do things here, how we teach, and how we operate in the world. But I'm taking special care with that message tonight because tonight is a night where I really feel like the event I'm speaking at is doing that and is really manifesting the kind of emphasis on change and action and a relationship between the university and the world that I think is so important in the spirit of the acknowledgement that I gave tonight. I'm of course talking about the amazing legacy of Whitney Young and the Whitney Young Award recipients that we're so fortunate to have with us here tonight. And so my thanks have to go particularly to Bob and Rebecca, who conceived of and proposed this event that I was so happy to support, but for which they and our speakers here tonight really deserve the credit. So with that, I'll let them take over and look forward to the rest of the event. And one more thing, unfortunately, I've learned that as a person like me, I get overscheduled if I'm not careful, and that is the case this evening, so I'll have to leave before the end of the Q&A, but I'm really glad to be here for the event. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Nicholas, for that pleasant acknowledgement, and thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to everyone who we know is joining online and is part of the discussion. So my name is Rebecca Berry, and I'm here tonight with my co-lecturer in professional practice, Bob Moore, who's sitting right over here. And we first have to give a somewhat sad announcement about tonight, which is that, unfortunately, Tamara Eaglebull will not be able to join us tonight. She has become ill. However, we are still excited to have the group that we have with us tonight, because this panel, as Nicholas acknowledged, really came about from a set of conversations that we've been having in the professional practice class at MIT over the last few years. And the course in professional practice here at the Institute is really not just focused on understanding sort of the mechanics of practice and the things that you need to know to, say, manage a project or complete a set of documents or even sign a contract, but really what we've been focusing on is interrogating the bigger issues facing our profession, which include, of course, climate, engagement, equity, and these have been really the focuses on these Friday mornings where we gather with the students and of different sets of speakers we've had there. And what we really wanted to do was kind of bring those issues and those conversations out of that class and out of other places where we know these conversations have been happening and bring them here together. And so our guest tonight do represent those who have received the Whitney Young Award, the history of which you're going to learn more about in a moment from Emily Grandstaff Rice. But suffice it to say that the work of our guests tonight addresses really directly and within their approach to practice issues around equity and inclusion. And we really look forward to this discussion because we think what it will demonstrate is the impact that we as individuals and as members of this profession can have in creating the more just and equitable world that we are all seeking, so that what we talk about, to Nicholas's point, will not only be words, right, but will be reflected in our actions. So part of my role tonight is to introduce our moderators. So we have two moderators this evening, the first of which is Jensen Avery Johnson. And Jensen Johnson is a Master of Science in Architecture Studies candidate here at MIT. She has a B.Arch from University of Arkansas, which she finished in 2020. And she's doing some really amazing research here. And that research addresses and challenges the divisive and elitist nature that we encounter and absorb in spaces, and how architectural design, pedagogy, and practice have contributed to the issue. She's previously worked for Polk Stanley Wilcox Architects and Stantec, developing her professional skills as an architectural designer. And she intends to use her upcoming thesis entitled Black Space, Retrospective Epistemologies and Abject Dwellings as a groundwork for her professional career in art and design. Her career trajectory includes exhibition, design and curation, media production, and architectural installations. Jensen is also the recipient of the 2020 Alpha Rho Chi Medal for having shown ability for leadership, performed willing service for her school, and giving the promise of real professional merit. And our other moderator this evening is Emily Grandstaff Rice. Emily is a senior project manager and senior associate at Perkins & Will Boston. And as an architect, her portfolio includes work for a wide range of clients. Her most recent projects have focused on K-12 and higher education learning environments. I mean, she is drawn to them for their ability to change students' lives and to prepare them for the future. Emily has also demonstrated continued and significant service to the AIA, including leading the National Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Conversations and serving as the 2014 president of the Boston Society of Architects, AIA. As a former chair of AIA's Equity and Architecture Commission, she was instrumental in creating the AIA Guides for Professional Practice. And she is the incoming president of the American Institute of Architects. And she's going to use that national platform to advance equity, climate action, and effect widespread positive change within the industry. So I'm now going to turn the evening over to Emily and Jensen.
Thank you, Rebecca. So as Rebecca said, I am the president-elect of the AIA, so next Thursday I will become president, and thank you. I joke, send all grapes my way, and the good stuff too. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background about the Whitney M. Young Jr. Award. So legendary civil rights leader Whitney M. Young Jr. did not mince words during his keynote speech at the 1968 AIA National Convention in Portland, Oregon. The preceding decades witnessed monumental progress in America's troubled road towards racial equity. But as he stood at the podium before the nation's leading architectural organization, Young gazed upon a sea of almost entirely white male faces. He saw an AIA that appeared unfazed by the changing world around it and seized the opportunity to start a conversation that carries on to this day. He told a crowd teeming with some of the most prominent figures in architecture, and I quote, "One need only take a casual look at this audience to see that we have a long way to go in this field. You are not a profession that has distinguished itself by your social and civic contributions to the cause of civil rights. You are most distinguished by your thunderous silence." So these pointed remarks hit home as Young spoke in June of 1968. So a little bit for context, I was born in '76, so sometimes I need a refresher. Just weeks before the AIA convention, presidential hopeful and noted civil rights supporter Robert Kennedy was gunned down in California. And earlier that spring, an assassin's bullet took the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis. sparking race riots and violent protests in more than 50 US cities. Even the specter of the late President John F. Kennedy loomed at the convention, with Lady Bird Johnson herself making an appearance to promote environmental conservation. At the heart of Young's frustration with architecture was the ongoing growth of stark high-rise housing projects towering over the nation's toughest urban neighborhoods. For him, these vertical slums, as he called them, marked a failure not only for city governments, but also for the field of architecture as a whole. So following Young's sudden death in 1971 at the age of 49, the AIA founded the Whitney M. Young Jr. Award to continue rising to the challenge of creating a more socially conscious profession. And we're still doing that work today. Since 1972, the AIA Whitney M. Young Jr. Award, named in his memory, has distinguished an architect or an organization that embodies social responsibility and actively addresses a relevant issue, such as affordable housing, inclusiveness, or universal access. And the social engagement isn't restricted to architecture. It can be expressed in any area of the nominee's life or work. So I welcome Jensen to now introduce our distinguished speakers tonight.
Hello, I will be introducing Gabrielle and Catherine. So first, Gabrielle Bullock. Gabrielle's main motivation to enter the profession was a desire to positively impact the lives of African Americans and people of color in her community. As one of the 0.5% of licensed female African American architects in the community, she was the first African American and first woman to rise to the position of managing director at Perkins & Will. As Perkins & Will's Director of Global Diversity since 2013, Gabrielle's main focus has been to elevate and broaden Perkins & Will's culture of diversity and inclusion, lead the design profession toward more equitable practices, expand the pipeline for underrepresented groups within the profession, and influence broader society by tackling issues of equity and inclusion throughout impactful work. Gabrielle has been a key player in Perkins & Will's success for 3 decades in her New York and Los Angeles studios. Over the course of her career, she has led numerous complex and high-profile projects, most recently Destination Crenshaw, a project that combines all the elements that Gabrielle believes makes for a successful groundbreaking project. Gabrielle graduated in 1984 from the Rhode Island School of Design and with degrees in fine arts and architecture, becoming the second African-American woman in history to earn an architecture degree from that university. In 2014, she was elected by her peers as a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and serves on the AIA's Equity in Architecture Commission. She is a member of the National Organization of Minority Architects, a past board member of the Girl Scouts of Greater Los Angeles, and the Center for Architecture and Urban Design Los Angeles and the International Interior Design Association. She served as the 2018-2019 president of the International Interior Design Association. Gabrielle is a board member of the USC Architecture Guild and a trustee of the Rhode Island School of Design. Gabrielle is a recipient of the 2020 AIA Whitney Young Jr. Award for her commitment to advancing diversity in the architecture profession. She is also the recipient of the 2022 AIA Los Angeles Gold Medal. Gabrielle Bullock. And now for Catherine Williams. Yay! Catherine Williams is a licensed architect in Northern Virginia and currently an assistant director, capital projects at Georgetown University. Her career path includes work in traditional architecture firms, community development, and managing commercial construction for a general contractor. She restarted the Black Women in Architecture Brunch in DC, an annual event co-founded the Desiree Cooper ARE Scholarship, and is a founding collaborator for Writing the Vortex. Catherine has written about architecture and development and served as editor for multiple publications. She was the NOMA magazine editor from 2009 to 2014 In 2020, Catherine published Melvin Mitchell's book, African American Architects, Embracing Culture and Building Urban Communities. Catherine served as chair of the AIA Housing and Community Development KC Advisory Group and currently serves on the AIA Continuing Education Committee. She is a board member of the Village of Love and Resistance, working to build a cooperative community in East Baltimore. Catherine was an Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellow in San Francisco. She received the 2016 AIA Virginia Emerging Professionals Award and the 2013 National Organization of Minority Architects President's Award. Catherine Williams.
It's gonna fall.
I'm sorry. Gabrielle.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. So for context, I was 7 when Whitney Young made that speech, and 11 years later, I was a freshman at RISD. So I'm a girl from the Bronx. I was born in Harlem. I was raised in the Bronx. It was a multicultural city, as you know. Urban center, very diverse. I went to the High School of Music and Art, so I come from a very creative environment. I always felt like I belonged. My family, I was raised by a strong family of women who were very supportive and told me I could do whatever I put my mind to. I'm a first generation college graduate, and I used my story to demonstrate the sense of urgency that the faces of design must change and how we design must change. Architecture was my calling. I've been determined to harness the power of design to impact lives since I was 12, when I had a visceral reaction to the public housing in New York. The young me just knew and hoped that there was a better way, there's a better alternative to the living conditions of poor and people of color, my people. I set my mind to becoming an architect to improve how my people lived, to provide access to design for all. So from an art student at the High School of Music and Art in New York City to RISD, my journey for impact commenced. Why can't everybody live in beautiful homes, right? So RISD provided an excellent architecture education, providing skill and foundational knowledge to be an architect. But like most schools of the time, navigating academia of the 80s was an eye-opening view into the narrow lens with which architecture and design was taught and practiced. I didn't see urban communities of color or my lived experiences represented in studio with faculty, students, nor the classroom. I didn't see me. It was an era of celebrating iconic buildings and individual genius through the narrow Eurocentric lens. It wasn't until Maya Lin, and I think I was a junior or a senior, when she won the competition for the Vietnam Memorials as my first, and I vividly remember being excited that this was the first example in my architectural education that I'd seen an example of a culturally important, socially relevant, and impactful project that won a major design commission. I wasn't exposed to other Black architects. I didn't know about Paul Revere Williams until I moved to LA in the 90s, nor Norma Sklaric. In the end, did what I was supposed to do. I finished my time at RISD. I had a wonderful time. And I finished with my thesis focusing on reimagining housing in Harlem. As my bio says, I was number 2. I was the second Black woman to graduate from the Rhode Island School of Design Architecture Department in 1984. And in spite of the homogeneous nature of academia and professional practice back then, I absorbed the knowledge, the skill, learned all the rules, and the lingo, so I could pursue and achieve my aspirations and break those rules, because I honestly thought I'd have to break them. I'm one of 560 Black female architects, licensed architects in this country. It's 0.5%. It used to be 0.2%. The work that I set out to do as a 12-year-old is still true today. The work I embark on had to have purpose and impact. So as I embarked on my mission of impact and purpose, I joined Perkins & Will through an acquisition of another firm. After working for 3 small firms that did the kind of housing that I wanted to do, but it was the first recession that I experienced and they all went belly up. So the next best thing for me was working for a firm that, where I could hone my skills, find my advocacy voice, and become a change agent. And through all the work that I've done, it's been through a technical lens, through a project management lens, through a principal leadership lens. And honestly, that's because early on I'm like, I don't see any designers, big D, that look like me. They're probably not gonna let me in. It was an intimidating thing. So I chose that path. And as a project manager, project architect, principal leader, I had complete, not control, but input on how these projects developed and came to life. So for those of you who are considering which way to go any way you want, just own it all. So the projects I worked on, from large healthcare project, this is a 1 million square foot hospital, to a major trailblazing higher ed project in Saudi Arabia. It's the first co-ed university, to a healthcare, so a hospital in Saudi, another hospital in Saudi, through a small healthcare facade renovation in Los Angeles, to a camp in the mountains of Los Angeles, homeless housing from prefab units in Los Angeles, to 2 projects that I'm currently working on in Black Los Angeles, in South LA, that are mixed-use housing and community-focused projects that really celebrate the contributions of Black folks in LA. I want to say that, Destination Crenshaw, it's going on now, it's in construction, is probably the project that I feel most connected to and representative of the impact on community that I've been striving for. The immense pride that I have working with the Black community proves my dream was achievable and indeed will have a positive impact. I've come full circle in that regard. This is the first time that I've had a client that looked like me. And like I said, did I say I was 7 when Whitney Young did that thing? So it's been a while. So, I'm going to say a little bit about the Saudi projects. In working on those projects and with the teams, I became very aware how we were inconsistent in designing for cultures that are not like our own. And that without the cultural competency, without the cultural research, then we are not designing authentically a response for a culture that is very different from our own. So hold that thought. So in 2013, after completing the Saudi projects and transitioning from my managing director role, I decided it was time to promote and advocate for change. I felt we had to go beyond an aspiration, which most firms had at the time. It was time for real action. My commitment went from my personal stature to one that influences the environment and the profession at large. So I created the diversity role and strategy to transform Perkins & Will and the profession to be more diverse, inclusive, and engaged at a time when I had seen the impact of when we don't consider cultural uniqueness of who we were designing for. That, along with being frustrated with being the only one in the room. And the inequities abound in our profession. What was I going to do with my seat at the table? So this is our mission statement. This is what we developed in 2013. Pretty self-explanatory. We really wanted to be a beacon of change, focus on justice and equity, and really walk the walk. Fast forward to 2020. We had to be more intentional, more deliberate, and focus on justice and equity to achieve diversity and inclusion. And in fact, be very specific about challenging those status quo practices that had got us here in the first place. The 4 pillars of our approach, and this is very cursory, I got 10 minutes. There's a whole lot behind this. There's lots of detail. It's both qualitative and quantitative. But our 4 pillars of our strategy is to build a culture within Perkins & Will that focuses on JEDI. To establish it as a core value, design excellence, sustainability, all the other things. It's not an add-on, must be a core value. To build a future pipeline so that we can get beyond the three-digit number of the number of people that look like me in the profession. And to lead the way for the rest of the industry. That's part of the reason why I'm here today and I speak whenever asked about how we might do this. So we've been doing this 9 years. It's very successful. We are not done yet. I'm not sure we will ever be done. This is a changing thing. So that's Destination Crenshaw. I do want to say that Destination Crenshaw has incorporated the couple of things that I'm going to talk about now, and that is how this impacts the work we do. How does this show up in our work? And one way is that, one, we have to avoid culture erasure. We have to become completely culturally competent, and that's the top bar. And it means that unconsciously, subconsciously, we hold one's culture at the highest esteem and let it guide our work and our lives. Not to belittle it, not to pretend that we know what it is, but to truly let it guide our work. And understanding the social, what I call the social equity triangle. It's a comprehensive look and understanding of our social systems. The barriers within these social systems, the isms, will all impact the very notion of sustainable and resilient communities. In each of these societal realms, we have the opportunity to challenge the status quo, influence our clients, teams, and communities to change the course. I say challenge them all if they represent a barrier to equity. It is within our responsibility as stewards of the built environment to do just that, to go beyond do no harm. And then engage the community as a true partner, not just to report out. Destination Crenshaw, which all these pictures are from, is probably the project that I can proudly say that the community members were truly at the table with us as design partners. We were merely the interpreter of their story. At Perkins & Will, we call this holistic approach to design. All of those petals are important. Equity is up there, inclusion is up there, sustainability is up there, design excellence is up there. None of those are add-ons. We are measuring ourselves, we are keeping ourselves honest about doing just this, to transform our design process and who designs. I am very proud to have been Whitney Young because I got to meet Mr. Handsome. Met 44. And then last month I got the AIA LA Gold Medal. And I'm really proud of that because that medal, in my mind, typically went to an individual that represented iconic, beautiful buildings only. And so with this award, given to me represents the commitment to community, and that good architecture, great design also includes uplifting community in the process. So I'm just about done. My vision was solid, unrelenting, and as you can see, I didn't have a plan B. We can't ignore the impact we have on people, communities, and society. We have a responsibility to design with these concepts in mind to transform towards a more equitable profession. I set out to change the world in my own way, and hopefully I'm being as loud as Whitney Young has challenged us all to be. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Williams. Thank you all for having me, and thank you, MIT, for inviting me, and Rebecca and Bob, thanks for inviting me. Great to be on the panel with the illustrious Gabrielle. So I'll start out by saying that I'm going to go through a little bit of my path, but because my award as a Whitney Young Award winner was part of a group, I'm going to talk a little bit about what our group, Riding the Vortex, did to earn the award. So that's kind of bigger than me, myself. But I did want to share a little bit of my path as well, since I know we have students in the audience. And I always like to share because my path is not traditional architecture. So it's, I think, good for other people to see, as Gabrielle said, like that there are many ways to be an architect. And I've done several paths, several. I like to say several legs of the stool that create architecture and create buildings have been part of my journey. So I started, or I wanted to start just how I became an architect, because I think in thinking about diversity and how I got here, I think it's important. We talk a lot about the pipeline, so to talk a little bit about how I got to at least learn about architecture. For me, it was a Girl Scout career fair when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And then after that time, my mother actually, when she saw that interest in me, not just in architecture, but in design, I went to a lot of camps and after-school programs. Luckily, I was in the Richmond, Virginia area, and there were architecture firms that were part of like the Boy Scout Explorer program. Girl Scouts had different design and architecture career camps. So at a young age, I got a lot of exposure to architecture, which is not always the case for a lot of young people. And I will say that credit my mom for seeking out those opportunities as well, and not it wasn't just dependent on like who my counselor was in high school or my teachers and everything like that, but it was also like looking around at the community around me and the opportunities that they provided. So I went from attending camps and thinking about going to school, and I knew I wanted to attend a 5-year college program because at the time, the B-Arc was sort of the quickest, the cheapest, the fastest way to get a professional degree, because I knew I needed a professional degree to go get my license. So I ended up going to Howard, and one of the things making that choice was the fact that they offered me a full scholarship. So that was very helpful to me on my path because my parents did not have money to send me to school. So that was how I got to be in school, how I stayed in school and made it through that 5 years. And then I will also say, just because comparing to Gabrielle's experience, so Howard is a historically Black college, so I had a very different experience because I did have Black professors, actually Black but also international as well, people from Europe and the Middle East as professors, and then I was on a campus designed by Black architects. And Howard, at the time I was there, was very community-based, so a lot of our projects were based in the DC area and thinking about the community there, especially the Black communities that were around Howard and throughout the city. So a lot of our projects were revolved around that. So a little bit different experience, but I will say that that definitely had an effect on me because I came from sort of a suburban background, and then I was in this very city urbanized place. And one of the things that I always say that Howard kind of influenced me was as I was there in the late 90s, DC hadn't gone through its gentrification as most people know it today. So there were still a lot of vacant buildings. And for me as an architect, I was always thinking about like how can I as an architect influence changing those buildings and making them usable space and usable for the community. So I left school and kind of started on the traditional career path, as most people do. I went to the Richmond area and connected with the AIA there and really sought that out as the way that I could get into a path of work. And they connected me with an architect who was expanding his practice from a sole practitioner to a staffed firm. And so that's how I started out in a path. And I will say, I always tell people that I was spoiled by my first experience because I was at a firm that one was small, so I got to do a lot of things beyond just the architecture. We had a graphic designer there, and the firm principal also did a lot of exhibit design as well as master planning, so I got exposure to both of those. And then I will also say that he was very family-oriented. So for me, as a young person, I saw someone who made their priority not just their firm, but their family. He was very involved in the community as far as the city that we were in, but also outside organizations, whether they were professional organizations or community-based organizations. So it showed me that as an architect, I didn't have to just go and sit at my desk and head down and only pay attention to what was on my computer screen or at the drafting table, but that there was a wide swath of how I could use my architecture skills. I went from that firm to a larger firm, and part of that reason was I wanted to get experience sort of in a larger firm. So I went from like a 6-person firm to a 100-person firm, and I wanted to get a little bit different exposure and just to see what that was like. I had worked at a larger firm interning at college, but very different than being there day to day on a 9-to-5. And part of that experience learning from that was, again, being around different resources. So there was an interior design studio, there were engineers. So a lot of the coordination that happens on design projects was happening in-house of the firm. So that experience gave me that. Part of my, as I said before, like going to Howard and sort of on the fast track to licensure, that was part of my thinking that I always wanted to be licensed. But at the end of that experience with that large firm, one of the things that I was really also thinking about was back to my days in DC and really how I as an architect could have an impact on the initiation of projects, which I wasn't getting to see at the firms that I was at. You know, I was the designer, I was waiting for the clients to come to me, but I also saw, like I said, I saw buildings and I was like, well, how can I as an architect really start to initiate those projects? So I did leave traditional practice and took on the Rose Fellowship. So that took me from Virginia to California. And part of that experience was really being embedded with an organization, a community-based organization, CDC, and getting to do community-focused work. So I was attending community meetings, and I remember my first one that I went to, I was like, wow, this is like my job now. It's not something that I'm doing, because I had done like some nonprofit work and some board stuff, but that was always after hours, most of the time, and very little connected to what I was doing on the 9-to-5. So it was very exciting for me to be able to do that on a day-to-day basis and really like get to sit and think about those things and what impact development was happening on the community that I was in. So I was in San Francisco and worked in 2 neighborhoods, Visitation Valley and the Bayview neighborhood in San Francisco. And I really got to see like how a community organization leverages the impact that it has, leverages its relationship with the city, leverages its relationship with community members to have an impact on their community and get to build something as small as this small art mural on the photo there, but also as large as a 18-unit affordable housing development that was mixed use and had a restaurant on the ground floor, which in the neighborhood that we were working in was one of the first sort of sit-down restaurants that came back to that neighborhood in San Francisco. So I didn't go there with my license, but I did end up getting my license while I was there. So for me, that was kind of like checking that box and was like, okay, I'm an architect now. I have this, I've gotten that position in my career. So I was in California for about 6 years, and then I came back to Virginia. And at the time, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I'd been in community-based work, but at the time, that was around 2012, 2013. This was right after the recession, and being in a new place for me, because it was new since I hadn't been there for like 6 years, it was very difficult to find my way back into that community development sphere. So just looking around at how I could use my skills, I ended up going to a general contractor, which is actually a great experience as an architect, because I was now reading the architect's drawings in a totally different way, because I was trying to figure out how things were going to get built on site, what are the subcontractors that we needed, how are we going to put this building or this space together. So it was actually a great experience, and that helped parlay into my next step, which was working for an owner, which is what I do now. So I work for a university. I'm, I guess, the owner's rep, as you could say. And we're on campus, so my team is on campus, and we are basically managing the architects and the contractors that come in to the university to design and build projects on the campus. And I will say that one of the things that, thinking about impact, I think, as Emily mentioned, as far as the Whitney Young Award and sort of what you get awarded for, one of the things that I really tell people, even though I'm not in a traditional architecture role, I'm still having an impact on architecture, but I'm also having an impact on hiring, whether that's hiring my staff or hiring the vendors, which are the architects, the engineers, the contractors that are coming onto the campus. And one of the ways that for me is a great way to impact, because the university does have diversity and inclusion goals. And so having a person like me at the table, like I'm the one that raises my hand and says like, hey, so we have this 35% goal, like how are we meeting that? Are we actually, are we thinking about that when we're hiring, when we're giving our master agreements? Like, is that in the point system? And when it's not there, like, we need to make sure it's there, because it is something that, because it's, we have templates and what like that, if those templates don't get updated, then it gets missed. And so having a person there that's gonna like raise their hand and actually say that is helping the university meet those goals, but also helping us diversify who's working on our campus and the opportunities that we're giving to vendors as well as the people that we're hiring. So I wanted to talk a little bit then about Riding the Vortex. So Riding the Vortex is a panel presentation. Usually it's 4 to 5 African-American women. And the session started around 2007. And at the time, there was very little publicity specifically about African-American women in their work. And there were less than 200 licensed Black women in 2007. So I was asked to join the panel. So I knew the women who were starting it, Catherine Prigmore and Barbara Loy, were both connected to me through Howard. Catherine Prigmore was a professor of mine, and Barbara Loy was a professor there. And they're in the photo on the left, bottom left, with myself and Kathy Dixon. And so at the time, in 2007, I was 6 or 7 years out of school. Usually the sessions were women across the range of careers, so from early graduate to senior executive level. And so I was invited as sort of the early graduate professional on the team. And then the photo that you see today, unfortunately, Barbara Loy passed in 2012. So we have added Melissa Daniel to our team. And really, so what we think about is when we're doing these sessions is how are we sharing our stories, and how are we helping to mentor and bring the story of African-American women to the public. So this is objectives that I did a session, our last session actually was at the NOMA conference, and I put this together, and I thought it was a really good way of sort of distilling down what we talk about in our sessions. So usually it's data, so we look at the data, which I will share a little bit later. We talk about development, so thinking about career development, and that's the whole goal of having the 4 to 5 women that are going from the early career to senior executive, is that you can really see how people's paths are different, but also how they're the same, and what barriers are still around for someone who's 40 years in profession that they experienced, and someone who's like 5 to 6 years out of school. Diversity, of course, so thinking about how those stories, sharing how diversity has been an impact and how has it contributed to the person's professional career and also their community and environment. And then dismantling, right? So one of the reasons that we're here today, talking about like how are we dismantling those stereotypes and also the, that typical view of architecture in the profession. So Vortex, as I said before, started in 2007, and this slide is just a few of the statistics just about about our session. So this was as of 2021, and this slide was actually part of our presentation, our package for the award. So it's like a year old, so some of these statistics have slightly changed because now we're about 15 years in, 25 presentations. We're actually up to like 30 presenters now. And as I said, we've done the session at multiple AIA conferences and NOMA conferences. And we've also tried to spread that out, whether that be a national conference or regional conferences. And then in 2020 and 2021, because of everything going virtual, we actually expanded out to non-architecture groups and were able to present virtually to some other groups like the National Technical Association and the NAACP's Building and Communities group. And then you also have a list of cities there. And I also wanted to show this photo, which is, or this slide, which is photos of our sessions. So even though our sessions have been focused on African-American women, our audience has usually been diverse. And sometimes we have added some diversity as far as the panel presenters. But I think that it's important to show that we're not always speaking to ourselves, even though we try to create a space that is safe for African-American women to come in and share their stories. We also encourage people who, want to hear their stories and learn from us to be in the room and to participate in the discussion and the Q&A. So we feel like that's important to note as well. And then we've also sort of used that platform to do other things like exhibits as well as magazine articles, which is what you see a few of here. So really trying to share that story beyond just an in-person panel, but things that live on beyond that in-person session. And then Gabrielle touched a little bit on the statistics. So here they are in black and white. So currently, this is as of October. And I know the number has increased a little bit because I do help with the directory, so I know that there's a few more people that need to get added for the year. But yeah, and as of October, there are 560 African-American women and 1,920 African-American men, which is a total of 2,480. And then one of the things that we did this year with Vortex at the NOMA conference was we actually flipped it and called it Riding the Vortex 180. So we actually did a session of African-American men. We had 4 men who came and presented their stories. And one of the reasons that we did that was because if you look at the statistics, the African-American men is sort of flattening out, whereas the women has increased tremendously over the last 10 years. And so, well, actually probably like doubled over the last 10 years, because like when I started, it was around 200, and now we're up to 560. So over that 15, 20-year span, the women have kind of doubled. And so in our mind, like we're not going to see that, what total is 2%, 1.9 or so of total architects. We're not going to see that. We're not going to see that increase if the men sort of like flatline or either fall off or decrease their rate of increase. And then I also wanted to show these numbers, which are from NCARB's reporting. So the previous graphs were ones that our group has done using the Directory of African American Architects. These are all numbers as reported from NCARB's by the numbers report. So NCARB does an annual report, and it's probably only in the last 5 years, I believe, that they actually have started breaking out that report in demographics. One of the reasons that I started some of these graphing exercises was because when I was getting licensed around 2009, 2010, there was the directory which had a number, but it didn't say like, how has that number increased like over the last 5, 10 years, and sort of what's the rate. So I started doing all these graphs and stuff like that. And then at the time, NCARB would just say, it's this many architects, and this is how many people have finished the test. There was no breakout of that information. And so if you go back and look at their reports, like I said, over the last 5 or so years, they've actually started breaking it out by demographics, as well as demographics as far as gender, race, even like age. So the top left graph shows reporting experience, so basically people who are doing their internship and how that number has increased. So the percentages that I show here are African Americans as a percentage of the whole. So if you look at the graphs, the orange represents white, the green represents Hispanic, the purple represents Asian, which I think you can see, and the gray is black, and then the blue is other. So if you're looking at this is that number, so the 4%, 4.8% is of the total, and then 1% increase is year over year. And so I just carried that across on all the graphs. So on ARE completions, they showed them by year. So this is the last 2021 number, so a 4.11% of ARE completions are African American, and that's a 0.1% increase year over year. So as you can see, like, we're way down here. Same with completing licensure. So we're at 2.3% of all the people completing licensure. And I'm sorry, I don't have the total on this. I should have put that on here, but I'm just focused on the percentages on this. But 2.3%, which is a 0.4% increase. Again, it's the number down here. And then this is the architect population. So as you can see, architect population, this is the white population, which is like 80%, and then this is black population, 1.9. And everyone else is around the same, so Hispanic 5, Asian 6, and then other, I think 3.7. So I do like to show those stats because a lot of people don't know that that report is out there. You can actually go get it, you can go look at them. NCARB describes how they get their data. And as I said, this is just a small snippet. These 4 graphs are just a small snippet of that data that they have. And then this is the directory of African American architects. And this is kind of their banner. Again, this is just showing as of October the total. And that's all I have.
So no Jeopardy music, but I'll do the transition. So we're going to transition to a panel now where Jensen and I are going to ask some questions for a little bit, and then we'll actually open it up for audience questions. So for those of you who are remote, I believe you can put questions into some magic window that will translate to a Google Doc that we'll be looking at, so we'll be able to see the questions. And for those of you in the room, we have 2 microphones set up here. If ambulatory issues are a concern, just flag us down and we'll make sure the microphone comes to you. So, holy cow. We have say something else. Oh, yeah. We have a lot to talk about. And I wanted to make sure that we recognize all that took us to get to this room today. So travel and all of that, and thank you for your time and effort. Jensen, when we were talking, I wanted you to ask the first question because you've got a good one. So I'll pass it to you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentations. My first question is, how do you think architecture and the pedagogy, the practice of architecture, has contributed to the divisiveness that we encounter in spaces?
Opinion? Should I pull my slide up again? I think first and foremost, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so regardless of the pedagogy, who's teaching, who's learning, and if it's not representative, that's the first piece. I think the other thing is to change. If the pedagogy doesn't change, then the outcome's not going to change, right? What's the definition of insanity?
Over and over again.
Right. So that's my short answer.
Okay.
So architecture contributing to the device.
divisive nature that
Okay.
we encounter?
I was going to go a different direction on that. Well, no, because I was thinking about, you're talking about growing up in New York. So one of the reasons, or one of the things that my daughter and I actually were talking last night to an architect that I know here, and we were talking about the Rose Fellowship because the Rose Fellowship is actually ending as of this year, which is very sad for us who have been fellows and have benefited from that experience. But I was also saying that one of the things that the Rose Fellowship set out to accomplish was to improve the condition of affordable housing in the United States because, I won't say that all, but like a lot of the affordable housing previous to 20 years ago when the Rose Fellowship started, you could definitely like drive through a neighborhood and be like, oh, that's the affordable housing, that's everybody else's housing. So thinking about divisiveness, if you are in a place where people are already looking down on you because of the building that you live in, and especially like as a kid, that you don't choose to live there, right? And your parents, like their income situation may put them in that space. So again, it's not always a choice for them either. So if that's where you're starting out from, then you've already, like for me, like that's the architecture of divisiveness, right? If we are saying that people don't deserve the same quality of building just because their income is a certain way versus someone else's income, then you've already created the divisiveness. So one of the things the fellowship set out to was really sort of raising the standard of affordable housing and making sure that like people that were living in affordable housing or even going to experience it, right? Because in larger cities, those buildings are mixed-use buildings. So you may have a community center or a library or something like that on the ground floor, making sure that those buildings, those spaces were just as nice as the person who's paying, full market rate for their housing or their building or their neighborhood where they live at. So I think even though, we're sad about the fellowship and ending, that we can also say that we have seen the shift in the recognition that affordable housing design should just be as great, whatever that building, that housing is, it should be just as great as whatever housing that architects are designing.
But if the cities and the municipalities don't see that as vital and build into the regulations, then you're at the mercy of the developers, right? And so if you have developers who care, right, and see the value, then that would be the shift. And I am seeing that shift a little bit. I think the shift is going to continue. I think we're only going to get better and less divisive, but first you have to acknowledge that there's a problem.
Right. And I think developers, being on like an owner's side, I think you have to recognize that if people see the place that they live or the space that they're using as important and valuable, they're going to take care of it versus, this is just a place where I live and I'm here till I can get out because I hate this building or I hate this space.
And that's part of that, we don't design for, we design for, we should be designing with, right? That's how you build the pride and the ownership, sense of pride, sense of ownership, and what I like to say, eyes on the block.
Yes.
So these conversations came up in the context of the professional practice class that Rebecca and Bob lead here at MIT. And one of the aspects of that is ethics. Like what is our ethical responsibility? And often, if we take a cue from the medical industry, right, it's to do no harm. And it's almost a negative. Don't do this, et cetera. If we were to flip that and say, what are the ethics of making change? What would you say to architects? What needs to happen in this profession for us to look more towards doing good as opposed to doing harm, which has been the case for many years. And that's how Whitney Young started this conversation.
Right. Lead with cultural competency.
Yeah. And that's a baseline?
That's a baseline. And also, I don't know how to make this succinct, so I'll just blurt it out. There aren't, the professions lack such diversity. I think there's more cultural competency than we get to see. But without the representation, then we all have to learn how to design for everybody authentically. And so if you, and I wish Tammy were here because she speaks eloquently about engaging Indigenous architects on projects with clients that you may not represent, may not be able to connect to. So I think the ethical thing is to recognize when you are out of your league, when you don't know, that will lead you to engage those that do. And I think as a profession, that's something that we've not done a very good job about.
Some might argue we've been trained to know everything.
Well, exactly, that's like,
Yeah.
throw it to the wind. Challenge the status quo.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, for me, it's like treat others as you want to be treated, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like it starts with that as far as ethics, right? And so, the same way in design, if like you wouldn't want to live in a place or you wouldn't want to be in a space, like what makes you think someone else is gonna want to be in that space? So.
It's interesting, architects, we've been trained not to talk about fee, right?
Yeah.
Because we could get in trouble for that. I think we have to talk about this other stuff.
Yeah.
We've been so good at following that rule. Let's break the rule that says you can't talk about racism. You can't talk about sexism. You can't talk about all the isms and how it's impacting what we design and who we design for and where we design.
And those conversations start with cultural competency, because then you can get to the heart of what the issue is rather than defensiveness, which is where we are in a political home these days.
Yeah, I was going to say also with the cultural competency too, I think that goes back to the architects, like thinking that they always know the answer, right? And like, part of my time when I was in San Francisco was a lot of time just spending listening to people who had been in neighborhoods like all their lives, right? And so they could tell me like, oh, this is the history of this place and why it looks like this or why this building is here and stuff like that. So it definitely, for me, was a learning of like stepping back and like listening to the people who were there first versus like saying like, oh yeah, here's the architectural solution. Like, no, let's listen to who's here, what they see as issues, what they see as positives, what they see as negatives in their community first, and then think about like what's the architectural solution to this problem that's being presented.
So a couple years ago, I made T-shirts, which celebrated the then 6 female Whitney Young Award winners. So this award was started in 1972, and there's been a handful of female winners, which has not been the case of the last 4 years, because you guys have been basically
It's been what's the word?
cleaning up.
Clean up. We've been cleaning up.
You want to talk a little bit about the intersectionality of the work that you do, both being not the dominant culture in architecture, racial and ethnically, but also gender, and how that factors into it?
So for me, it's a little bit different because, I'm younger, so I had a little bit, I want to say it was a little bit different when I entered the profession. But I will say, going back to my first experience, right? I do say I was literally spoiled by that first experience, because it wasn't even though the principal was a male, there was never a question of me and my competence because of being a female, right? And so it wasn't probably till later in my career where I was in spaces where I walk in the room and am the only female. But then I'm also, when I was at a general contractor, I was the project manager. So, even though I walk in and I'm the only woman there, I'm the person who's, controlling the meeting, right? And so I think that that's a thing, but I think as long as, I haven't had an experience, I guess, where I had men, at least not to my face, right?
Yeah.
Questioning me,
Yeah.
when I walk into a room and say okay, this is what we're doing, this is how we're handling this, right? And so I'm trying to, in my mind, and this happened with me today, because I had a staff member at a meeting and I was virtual and I saw the meeting and I was like, why are you sitting in the corner? This is a woman, right? I was like, why are you sitting in the corner of the room? I was like, please go sit at the table. You're the owner's rep, you're controlling the project. Even though we have a consultant and all these kind of things, I'm like, you are the point person. You need to be you need to be not necessarily front and center, but you need to be at the table. Like, you don't need to be sitting at a chair, like, in the back of the room. So I'm trying to, like, impart that empowerment to other women, because for me, I haven't had a great experience where I was like, oh my gosh, you're Black, you're a woman, you can't do these things. So, I mean, I guess I've been spoiled in that, but I'm trying to, like, teach that to other people versus, like, just saying, like, oh yeah, I've had it great, and, aren't I wonderful? I'm like, no, like, these are the things that people who were mentors to me or, who work with me let me do these things. So, like, I'm trying to make sure that the people who are coming behind me also realize, like, yeah, even though you are Black, you are a woman, like, don't step back in the shadows, right? Be front and center, because you have that right.
The old one says.
I didn't call you old.
No, I know, you said you're much younger. Which you are.
I'm a different generation.
That's it. We're different generations. I can't say that I've probably had some blatant sexism, racism stuff, but I would say that in my role as Director of Global Diversity for the entire firm, that I am in the unique position to explore and interrogate, somebody used that word in the introduction, I love that, what's going on in the firm. And so by intentionally and deliberately asking and seeking, where are the issues? Are there opportunities? Where are we getting better? And so I'm glad that I don't have to just go by my own perspective, but I get to look at all the others, literally others.
I love the quote that was in the Destination Crenshaw rendering, and I'll read it for those of you who may not have caught it. Any form of art is a form of power, and it can not only move us, it makes us more. And that was Ozzie Davis. And it's evident the humanity and the power that is in your work. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I have a question about your thoughts on education versus indoctrination. So one thing you mentioned was about, you said something about being trained to not talk about fees or just things that you absorb during your education. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot in my graduate studies, but I'm interested about what does the trajectory look like when you have an architectural education versus when you have been indoctrinated to think about architecture in a particular way in practice?
So indoctrination, that's interesting. I thought my education, I didn't see it as an indoctrination. I thought that it was, they left stuff out. They left stuff out. And so I think the trajectory, if it's not changed, if it isn't more inclusive, if it isn't more representative of the lived experiences that our cities and our people, all people are experiencing, then it will be irrelevant. I go back to the example of the worst public housing projects on the face of the planet, Cabrini Green, some others that they were so bad, they created such strife and crime and just this domino effect. But, and architects go, oh, it's a high rise. Doing a skyscraper, woohoo, right? So I think if we don't change the way and the why of architectural education, so I don't think it's a choice between indoctrination, and I think indoctrination is not gonna work. First of all, the next generations aren't gonna have it, right? That's who's driving, in my experience, that's who's driving the change. It's not the old dogs like me, and hopefully y'all don't want to hear this story anymore after a while. It's like it's old, it's new, it's all different now. I want to see you guys tell me how it's different, because you guys are driving the change.
I don't know, that's a hard one for me because I don't feel like my education was an indoctrination. I mean, like I said, it was, I feel like there was, a wholeness to my education and who I saw as an architect, what I saw as valued as far as buildings and those kind of things. So it was a little bit different for me. Yeah, so I don't know. But I mean, I do think I do think part of architecture, like because it is so wide and deep, like when we go beyond, the traditional like Eurocentric model, that it is also about students exploring, right? And seeking out things that they want to learn about that they aren't getting in school and bringing those back to, their programs and saying, oh, why aren't we learning this? Or why aren't we like hearing about this in history class? Or, why aren't we looking at these other firms in our ProPac class or in construction documents? Why aren't we looking at other techniques as far as construction and those kind of things? So I think that's one way that, like everyone else, so students can have a voice, but also, I think it's both ways, right? It's students pushing, and then, from the grassroots side, but I think it's also administrators and professors expanding beyond, the syllabus that they've been using for 10 years and thinking like, what are the things that I'm missing? So.
Okay. I don't know.
I don't think she's satisfied with that.
It's a little bit different for me because I was at HBCU. So like when you think about like HBCUs, like right, we're a small, like 7 schools out of the 100+ architecture schools, right? But for me at least, like Howard 20 years ago, like that curriculum is very different from like when I hear my friends who are at PWIs, like it was just very different. And so like I come from a different place thinking about education.
So I appreciate your answer because it kind of leads me into my next question, which I'm not actually sure I'm not sure how to craft it, but it's about affirmation. So both of you discussed your backgrounds in your presentation. Gabrielle, you talked about when you were growing up, you were affirmed in your family. They told you that you could do anything that you put your mind to. And then you went on to go to a predominantly white school where you didn't see people that looked like you. And so I'm sure that wasn't affirming. And then Catherine, you went to an HBCU, which I didn't go to one, but I know that HBCUs typically, like the culture there, it's an affirming space of who you are and what you can do. And so those are 2 very different educational experiences, and yet your careers have led you both to receiving this award and doing very impactful work. And so don't know what the question is here. I think it's just something I wanted to bring up about the power of feeling affirmed or being affirmed in the spaces that you matriculate through. And I don't know if you have any further thoughts about that.
While I may have been the only one in the room in the architecture department, there was a tribe that I found at RISD. So it wasn't within the architecture. And again, the calling for me to be an architect, come hell or high water, I was going to be an architect. So if the experience at RISD or anywhere else I went was going to be miserable, it was going to be miserable for 5 years. And then I was going to move on and I was going to be an architect, right? And I'm not saying I had a miserable experience. I just knew, I was shocked when I got to architecture school and realized that not every place was as diverse and inclusive as New York City. So I was a bit naive, right? And so I learned through that, and I found my tribe both within RISD and within Providence, you know what I mean? So I don't necessarily need everything from one spot for me to thrive. And if I was paying for it, I was gonna get through it, which I was.
Yeah, so I'll say on the affirmation, like I talked about my mom, so I definitely think like that, kind of, and my family in general, affirming like what I was doing and where I was going. So, because I grew up in an environment that was not New York, was very suburban and mostly white. So I grew up in that environment, went to Howard, and then returned to that environment. And the first AIA meeting, as a new graduate back from Howard, I walked into the room and was the only Black person there. And so I had to like reset in my mind, be like, oh yeah, this is that environment again. But I will say that, even though that was kind of like the start of that, like talking to those people there and, telling them what I wanted as a young graduate coming back to that community, I will say that the people who were on that AIA chapter board when I first started were actually very welcoming, and I was like, hey, where's the ARE exams and where's all these things for young professionals? And they were like, okay, well, if you're interested, you can like join our board and make it happen. And again, talking about like being a Black woman in the room, like it wasn't like that wasn't question. I wasn't questioned, or that was like, hey, you're interested in these things. If you can make it happen, then we'll support you to do that. So, so I think again, that's another way of like how I was affirmed, and like I see that these things are important and they're not being done. How do we get them done? So I think affirmation is important, and I think that's when we talk about not only like starting school and getting into the profession, like when we talk about cultures of firms and who firms are affirming, whether that's promotion or the projects that you're giving people, that's an issue that we see of like diversifying the profession, right? If you can hire someone, right? But if they don't stay because they don't feel like they're getting affirmed and, a year later they're gone, then we're not helping the profession.
Well put. We have a couple questions that have come in online. So at this point, we're actually going to transition to see if you have questions. So why don't I start with one that's online, and if someone in the room would like to ask a question, feel free to do that. So what subjects would you encourage students to take in school to break the design studio mentality? That's loaded.
In college?
Yeah.
Oh, to break the design studio mentality, like anything outside of the architecture building. When I was at Howard, I did like piano for 3 semesters. I took a lot of classes in the arts building. Howard has a whole Black arts curriculum, so I did, history of Blacks in the arts. I'm trying to think, what else did I do? Choir. Yeah, so I think anything outside of the studio where you're meeting other people and opening yourself up to learning other things besides just architecture.
And I got involved in the local community stuff, like the Boys and Girls Club, teaching them pottery or something like that. Yeah. That's how I got my non-studio fix.
Yeah, I volunteered at the library when I was there. So, yeah.
You want to take the next one?
Sure.
Okay, I'll let you choose which one's next.
Okay.
Good thing I can't see.
And then we've got a question coming up, maybe.
Okay. As an architect, sorry.
Okay, hello. My name is Ruben Cheeks. I work at Canon Design in Boston. I want to first say that I'm honored to be in the same space as all of you all here. And I also went to the Norman Nashville conference, and I see that you both were there as well, so nice to see you again. I also see myself as an advocate for, that thunderous silence that is still, happening in our profession, and that I think we're kind of breaking out of. But I do also have a question about, what do you think about the 2030 diversity challenge that we set for ourselves? And do you feel that it's attainable? And do you have any tips for, our brothers and sisters and our colleagues that are, trying to reach that goal just as I am?
So Ruben, could you clarify what the 2030 Diversity Challenge, the NOMA 2030 Diversity Challenge is?
Yes.
For those in the room who might not know what it is.
Please clarify if I don't get this correctly, but I believe it's a challenge for minority architects to reach 5,000 architects by the year 2030. So, like I said, I'm also on that track too, so I'm trying to reach that goal. But what do you think about that overarching goal that we see and have?
I think it's an aspirational goal. I was just about to do the math, but I didn't have time.
I can do the math.
Okay. How many years is that from now?
Well, right now it's only 8 years from now.
I think it's aspirational, and it's a good thing to shoot for. We have demographic goals and targets within Perkins and Will as well. And I can tell you that while we are really diligent and have a strategy, we have not increased the level of African Americans above 4%. It's remained 4 to 5% for the last 9 years. So unless there is a significant commitment and action by schools for scholarships, firms to do what they say they want to do to meet that challenge, like really, we have to knock it out of the box because it's not going to happen I mean, look how long we've been talking about this, since 1968. So I'm skeptical. I love aspirational goals, but I want to see some real meat behind it and some real tactics and commitments.
So I'll speak just because I am intimately knowledgeable of the numbers. So I think at the time when the 2030 goal was put out there, I think maybe we had 10 years or so. So it would have been like 100 African Americans licensed every year to get to that 5,000 goal. And over the years that I've been tracking, like the most we've gotten is like 70 in a year. And that's like been a high year. That's not consistently. It's probably consistently more around 40, 50. So it is, as Gabrielle said, it's aspirational. It's not unachievable because if you look at the pipeline, and not even the pipeline of like putting people in the pipeline, but if you look at the people who are either have graduated with a professional degree and have started their hours, or like maybe on the brink of graduating, it's about 3,000 people. So it's attainable, but it's like almost like all 3,000 of those people have to get licensed, which we know that, yeah, there's no margin of error, right? Which we know is pretty hard to do. It's not impossible, but it's pretty hard to do. And like Gabrielle said, like, I mean, I will say, so I was at the Building Museum this week. They've been doing a series, and so the Large Firm Roundtable was there. Like 6 members of the Large Firm Roundtable from the AIA were there. Talking on the same topic, and so the Large Firm Roundtable has taken up some of the mantle of that, which thinking about like hiring and scholarships and stuff like that, but I mean, it needs to like increase by like magnitudes if we're gonna make that goal. So I think
the efforts that we're talking about for the 2030, those have just been putting into place in the last 4 or 5 years, right? So there's a lot of people probably don't even know what it is.
Thank you.
So be thunderous about that.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I know, like, when I was getting licensed, it was also about, like, people who were around me were getting licensed and, like, us all pushing each other, right? Because it's very hard to do that as a singular person and really, like, stay on track with that. So if you're, like, either you're, like, not having the firm support or, the financial support and all that kind of stuff, like, just having other people who are, like, helping you through that journey makes a difference.
So some of the conversations that from AI National that we've been having with NCARB is, are there things that are baked into the process that are disproportionately affecting people of color? And one of them is the rolling clock. So we're actively working to be able to take away the rolling clock, as well as access to testing centers, which has been shifted. So I think there's every little bit helps. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you guys for your presentations. You were wonderful. So I'm currently a building technology student here, and I just recently graduated this past year from Howard as well. And I agree, like, in that curriculum, there is always kind of this underlying responsibility, like this underlying question from peers and faculty, like, what is your responsibility to the wider community and like all the work that you do is kind of like woven into the fabric of the curriculum. And I've noticed just kind of from my outside experiences and even kind of like coming here as well, and then now that I deal in sustainability, I kind of face similar issues where I'm challenged with trying to, and you guys both also work in these spaces, trying to encourage people to understand the importance of diversity in different spaces. like, what advice would you have for kind of helping people understand that it's important, even if it's not your specific interest, to care about sustainability, to care about diversity in the work that you do?
Depending on the group that you're talking or the people you're trying to indoctrinate.
We're all on a spectrum. That's usually where I start. We're all on a spectrum.
I think you have to find a way to point out the values that it's like, come on, how long have we been talking about sustainability, right? And we're still not there yet. I think we don't have that many years to talk about equity. I think it's just too urgent. And so I would suggest that, you know, if you look at what happened during the pandemic, it was, you know, what I used to call it, it's like 3 strikes. It was health, it was, I mean, the whole thing. And through that, I think folks realized where the inequities are. And so I would just, you know, have a conversation. So why would you do it this way? Why don't you do it this way? Because this will lead to this, and that leads to inequities. You know what I mean? I can't give you a roadmap except to ask the question or pose the question to the entire team or the entire group. But I think it can't just be those of color or the others to bring these things up. It's got to be everybody. And if it's not the majority folks in the room saying it, then it's going to fall on deaf ears.
I'll say I don't know if this. I feel like this isn't the argument today, but I feel like this was the argument like 10 years ago. People were like, oh, well, the US is becoming more brown, and if you want to be able to address those clients, like, you have to diversify your firm. And so, like, I feel like that was the argument 10 years ago today, and it's only now kind of like circling back to like, no, this is not just about a firm getting work, but it's about like the social justice part of it. And if we're not reflecting like the actual world that we live in, like, how are we as a firm, you know, sort of being active in this space, and, you know, sort of, you know, back to ethics and all those kind of things.
That's a good point you bring up. So clients are demanding this. Clients are demanding a diverse team, an ethical philosophy around justice and equity, and their staff are too, right? So
yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that clients feel empowered. Like, I mean, I work for a university, so it's a little different, but like when I was in San Francisco and, you know, being on more like the neighborhood side, I think, you know, maybe like 30 years ago, the neighborhood would be like, okay, it's another white architect, or it's another male architect coming into our community, or someone who's not like us, like whatever that is, right? Someone not like us, and that's just who we have to have. I feel like today, especially on the community side, like, people will stand up and say like, no, we want the architect or we want the designer who's coming here to look like us and to be from, you know, a shared cultural environment that we are from, and not just send anybody to our, you know, to our home or to our neighborhood to work on projects for us.
And even mainstream major corporations.
And universities, like on the university
universities
side.
are grappling with it too. So I think it's just get on board now or get on board later, or miss the boat.
It reminds me of what you said earlier, which is, you know, acknowledging what you don't know.
Right.
Hello.
She's gonna,
As a 20-year student of architecture, no, not really. For the students in the room, right, and if you go to a PWI, what are y'all's advice for keep going, right? Because you go to a PWI school, then you go into this predominantly white profession. Like, how do you not give up and decide to...
how do you not be?
How do you not give up and decide to design for Black LA with PW, or whatever it is you do with Black people? Yes, the Black organizations and whatnot. So how do you find the strength to keep going in the profession?
I didn't have a plan B. I'm going to be an architect. And I'm going to continue to be an architect, right? So, I mean, you got to love what we do, right? Because if you don't, I'd go do something else. I think that's the big part of it. I think the other part is find your tribe. Find the people that you can talk to about anything. You don't have to find the same group, talk about everything, but I find my tribe in, sometimes it's Emily. Sometimes it's my NOMA crew. Sometimes it's people back in the office. Sometimes it's other principals in other offices, right? So if you want to stick with it, then reach out to folks that can help you stick with it.
That doesn't mean it's not heavy sometimes.
Does it? Oh no, it's heavy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get much lighter.
Well, I will say that students today, I mean, you have the benefit of the internet, which neither one of us had when we were in school. Well, I'm just saying, as far as like connecting beyond, you know, who you see every day, right? So
telephone.
I had the internet, but our inboxes were limited to 1 meg. I was in the early internet. Thank you very much.
yeah, so when I was in high school, like my high school friend, I didn't have a computer at home, but my high school friend had AOL, and I was like, what? You're chatting with someone who's like across the country? What are you doing? So I mean, but I mean, as far as like finding Black architects or finding architects who are doing what you're doing, because I will say, like, even in school, like, right, for me, it was still like one path was, you know, everybody's gonna go into a firm and do this, which I did not do that at all. Like, I ended up doing like 3 or 4 different things and still be an architect, right? So I think that's also important, is that students look beyond, you know, sort of what they're doing day to day. And I only bring up the internet as in, like, you can look for other options. You can connect with people, right, who aren't at your school, LinkedIn or Instagram or Snapchat or however you want to do it, right? You can connect with other people and say, like, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Can we have a chat? Or are you coming to my city anytime soon that we can talk? Or how can I learn more about your work? Or is there someone in my city that you can refer me to that is doing similar work, or, you know, something like that? So I think, like, that's a great thing that I didn't necessarily have when I was in school. And so I think you have, like, students today have a lot of resources. And I will say, like Gabrielle said, like, finding your tribe and finding the people who are going to help you through school, whether that's the people in the architecture building or people outside the architecture building. Because I think you do, I mean, I don't know about you, but I still have like friends from not only architecture, but from, you know, school in general, and that were supportive when I was in school, and that I still continue with today, and have other groups that I've been connected with through my professional career that support what I'm doing as a person.
So we do have 2 more questions from our virtual audience. Do we have any more in our physical audience? 2 more here? Okay. Emily, I think we can do...
Well, why don't we do the 2021?
Oh, okay.
Since 2020 EDI discussions have been more at the forefront of the architecture industry, from observing, what do you think firms are generally getting wrong with efforts to engage EDI initiatives and outreach? I like this because you're in a firm and you hire firms.
You're in a firm.
This
I'm not in a firm.
No,
so
but I want to hear your answer because you hire firms and you see it from the other perspective.
Do you want to go first?
So since 2021, what are firms
They're
not
getting
getting?
wrong.
Oh, what are they getting wrong?
With efforts to engage.
So I mean, I'll go back to what I said before about like the hiring, and like, yes, you can hire, but if those people aren't staying in your firm, if it's like a, you know, a revolving door where someone comes in, they stays for a year, then they leave, then that's a flag, right? There's something wrong with the culture of your firm. And also, like, it's also like you can't have the only one, right? You can't have someone be the only one, because that's like a whole other set of pressure that is hard to deal with. Right? So if you're going to talk about diversity in your firm, talk about it as a whole, right? And don't just bring in, oh, one Black person, one Asian person, whatever like that, because they're going to feel like the other all the time. So thinking about like not just hiring, but the holistic view of diversity, and like how is your firm culturally changing, whether that's, you know, viewpoint, whether that's not just going to like the school that your principals graduated from to hire, but you know, spreading out like who's actually coming in to your firm from, you know, thought point and everything like that, geographic, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think purely focusing on the numbers is just not going to get you there. So it's not that it's wrong, but it's not just about the numbers. It's about what are you going to do when you hire this cohort of folks that you don't currently have? How are you going to keep them? How are you going to entice them to come there? How, you know, so it's not, so I think those that are doing it wrong are just myopically looking at the numbers. How do I increase the numbers? And that's not it. That's just one part of JEDI. Right? If you can't figure out justice, equity, and inclusion, then you might as well forget about the diversity, because that will fall apart, right?
But I was going to say, like, the other thing I say also, like, leadership, right? If you're not thinking about bringing someone in and their path into leadership in your firm, then that's also like a short-sightedness, right? Because, oh yeah, we have people in our firm, but if you're not giving them the opportunity to move up in your firm and become leaders and have like their voices actually mean something to what your firm is doing, then you're also not doing it right.
I would answer, there's a report that was published about a year ago called The Elephant in the Well-Designed Room. It's free for download on the AIA website. It talks about bias in the profession of architecture, and if you want to know what you're doing wrong, that's a great report. Yep.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing listening to you both share your experience and time with us. My name is Femi. I am a planning student at the Graduate School of Design, and I work for the African American Design Nexus. My particular question goes to the AICP process and recognizing African American designers. I wanted to really ask, you both touched on managing resources, managing schedules, managing people and process, and how sometimes in your career paths you sort of pivoted to different meanings of how you define architecture, really. My mind goes to John B. Williams, prominent urban planner who came into Oakland at the head of urban renewal. My mind also goes to the late Prescott Williams, who's your good friend, Catherine, who is no longer with us this year. Prescott eventually did get licensed, but there are many African Americans who are really part of the placemaking process, who are change makers, who are prominent project managers, and who really contribute. They may not be the architects or have that certification, but it seems to me that that certification is almost like the definition of being an architect, rather than the process and the effort and the sweat and the time to make actual change. Can you talk more about possibly any effort to expand this definition of African American designers and change makers?
I do recognize the challenge with, having the experience working in a firm, but not getting licensed, right? There's many avenues to be in there. And I think that's fine, and I think we can include those people and those professionals in a way, but I just have to say that unless we are going to, the entire profession, count that and give it value, then it's not going to make any difference, right? As long as, and from a personal standpoint, I had to become licensed. I was not going to be questioned that I didn't meet the criteria, right? So that is the burden of a Black woman in this profession. That was my burden. That that was not going to be the thing that's going to push me to the side. So I struggle with credentials, right? We need credentials. I believe in the credentials, but we also have to recognize that there are people who either couldn't afford to get licensed, didn't have access to getting licensed, learned the trade like the old days with the apprenticeship and things like that. So how do we count those folks? And I think they are counted within their firms. I think they're valued within their firms. It's just not in the big picture. So I don't know how to, are there two lists? That would be crazy.
Thank you for mentioning Prescott, one of my favorite people. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he is, a person that, and he was one of the people, like, because, I got licensed in 2010. I think he didn't get licensed to, like, maybe 2020 or something like that. And he's one of those people that, I was always like, okay, when are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? And so, yeah, I think the same.
He still made an impact.
Yeah, he still made an impact.
Everybody knew
Yeah.
what he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And everybody still engaged him. Clients engaged him.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like we didn't know it.
Right.
How he contributed.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I only look at the license as like a ticket to do things that, I mean, the license, part of the license is like, it's a jurisdictional thing, right? So like if you want to put drawings in for permit, they have to be signed and stamped by a licensed architect. So yeah, you as a non-licensed person, maybe you can do everything up until that point, but you still got to figure out how are you going to get your drawing stamped if you don't have the license. So it's an impediment. It's kind of like the state of the world right now. Like Gabrielle said, it's like we don't have a way around that right now. So it's kind of hard to say, like, for me to advocate for people not to get licensed. I totally understand that there's situations where people have either struggled to get licensed or the financial part or whatever like that. I mean, it's kind of one of the reasons. So one of the things that I didn't talk a lot about what I have, there's some other things that I didn't talk about in my part of the presentation. One of the things that I started a while ago was collecting stories of people during their licensure and them just like writing about what that experience was like. So I have a website, and one of the reasons I started doing that was because there were all these people who were like, oh, this is really hard, da, 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 and I was like, but like all these people have done it. And so like on that website, like there's 40 stories of people who have gotten their license, and they're all different, right? There's the person who like passed all their exams on the first try, and then there's the person who like struggled for years because they had test anxiety, and it wasn't until like 10 years that they figured out like, oh, if I go and like do hypnosis and that helps with my anxiety and I pass my last 3 exams and I'm done, right? So there's all those things, and I think if we don't pay attention to those individual stories, then we don't figure out, like just like you're talking about, like all the barriers. Like sometimes we have to look at all those individual stories because it's not one silver bullet that's going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to get 100 people licensed because this one thing right here is going to be fixed, right? So it's hard to say like, no, the licensure doesn't mean anything, but I understand the barriers that are there and the difficulties that are there. It's why we started the scholarship, the Desiree Cooper Scholarship, because like when we started that scholarship in 2015, 2016, there were still firms that weren't paying for their people to get licensed, right? So that was one barrier. We've seen improvements in that, but we also know that some people like don't want to have to depend on their firm for that, and they want to be able to pay for that themselves and not have to be like, oh yeah, I'm beholden to this firm who's paying for me to get licensed. So, yeah, so it's a lot of factors.
Okay, I think we can take one more question from the audience.
I remember when I first came here, I remember someone telling me, they were like, kind of speaking about intersectionality too, they were saying that most of like the Black women that they know who started out as architects no longer work in architecture. So I wonder, when looking at the numbers, do you guys think about retention and like having people stay architects, specifically designers? Because like both of you have like shifted out of, I guess, of being designers from what I have heard. So I wonder like how you kind of think about retention, and then also with like licensure. I know, like, I think the conversation here at MIT is like a lot of people are talking about not getting licensed, or they feel like they don't need the license. So I wonder what you think about kind of the future of licensure as like a metric, and if it might need to change based on how people are starting to think about the process and the need for the process. So I guess that's like 2 different questions, yeah.
The first part was retention.
Yeah.
It's as important as recruitment. The worst thing in the world is to recruit somebody and not be able to keep them. And so understanding what keeps people, and what keeps people are people and quality valued work. Nobody is really leaving for money. So And that's a real focus because, well, certainly for us, because if we, we can toot our own horn for, diversifying the staff, but if a year later we've lost, and because we haven't had the quality work or the work that folks want to do. So yeah, it's more important than recruitment, I think. What was the second part?
Value of licensure. No, circling back.
I think it's important.
I was going to say I could take the first part while you were thinking about that.
And as a principal in a firm, I have seen when folks are not licensed that in many instances it doesn't curtail their trajectory, but it's on a different path. And so unless there is a very unique skill that doesn't require to be licensed, then I'm all for it. But it's really difficult, particularly in a large firm, to not be licensed.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. There's always an opportunity for value of skill, depending on what the skill is, right? So you don't have to be licensed for that. But I will say that it will limit your trajectory. For instance, you cannot be a principal if you are not licensed. Is that right? If you're in that field. I'm looking at you two. Okay, so never mind. So see how the, see what happens?
But I will say there are, for better or for worse, state regulations. Like you can't own your own firm if you're not licensed and call yourself an architect in Massachusetts. Like at least one of the shareholders has to be a licensed architect. So there's systemic things out there that make it difficult or more difficult to practice in that realm.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So if you want to design buildings, work on buildings that require a licensed architect, you need to be a licensed architect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the retention thing is hard for me to think about as well because even within like my class of, I don't know, 25, 30 people that graduated, I might be the only Black woman licensed architect of the group. I think there are several Black women who are still in architecture, but they're doing other things where it's, they may be like leading, a design team at a firm or like me on the owner's rep side. So it's still like related to architecture, but not necessarily in. So I definitely recognize retention as a thing, but I also recognize like people's career paths lead different ways. I guess that goes back to that. That goes back to like the career in general, where architecture in general is like starts out like this and then gradually like funnels in general. Well, at least I think for our population. I haven't looked at other statistics of other populations, but I know. For our population, that's what happens. So, the more people that we get in, like hopefully the more that we can retain. But I think retention is a thing, but that, that's both personal and also systematic, right? If someone is determined, right, they're gonna be like, I'm gonna be an architect, and they're gonna figure out how to get past the barriers, get around the barriers, versus like other people who are like, oh, well, I found this other thing that, architecture isn't working for me, so I'm gonna go do this other thing. Even though I may have an architecture degree and I have the design thinking and those skills from college, I'm going to use those skills on something else.
But not being able to retain someone of a demographic that you're trying to increase, right? That's not good, right? Because that takes a certain. You have to think about why you're recruiting them in the first place and what is it that they need, right? So that's the recruitment that I think that. Given this conversation, is really crucial, and retention in schools too.
Yeah, that goes back to.
Like, do you have a lot of folks of color, students of color leaving?
Yeah, And
for any reason.
I was just going to say that goes back, I mean, equity by design, like they started out as the missing 32%, just looking at women in general, right? So like recognizing that women were leaving the profession. And one of the things that I love about the work that they did was like, you know, the surveys that they did over several years identified like 4 or 5 touch points from like the graduate, you know, getting into a firm to like, you know, once you're in a firm, then, you know, you have like family things that are a touch point, like women leave at that point, right? Up into like the leadership, right? If you're a mid-career person and you're recognizing you're not getting leadership opportunities, that's another place where people leave. So recognizing those touch points and figuring out how to make sure that firms are addressing them, or, you know, the profession in general is addressing them is gonna help with retention. But, you know, that's the system-wide part, and then there's the personal part, so.
Thank you. So now is the time in the evening when we wrap up. Just a quick note before we give a very hearty round of applause and thank you to our panelists, our wonderful moderators, and that is that on a note from MIT is, of course, thank everyone for coming. Thank you, online audience who are with us this evening. For, you know, being part of a really important conversation. And then on a personal note, I think one of the things that I've heard across all of you and all of your voices is the importance of this community that we're creating here amongst ourselves, right? And how we're taking a deeper look at that community and how we can be more reflective of our society, but also how we can, frankly, take that step back, right, and ask more different and more powerful questions of ourselves and of the work that we are doing together in community. And I just want to say that I think one of the biggest ways that we can help with recruitment and retention is by asking, what do we need? What do we need as people? What do we need in terms of fulfillment within our work, right? And to help us to be who we are as human beings. And that is, I think, something that all of you are doing. And so we thank you for